Pentagon ordering about 1,500 active duty soldiers to be ready for possible deployment to Minnesota amid a major immigration enforcement operation. That's according to two defense officials. They say 2 infantry battalions from the Army's 11th Airborne Division in Alaska are on prepare to deploy status. One official says the troops could be sent if President Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, which allows active duty forces to act as law enforcement. Trump recently threatened to use that law, then said there was no need, at least right now. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has urged the president not to do it. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal is highlighting the pressure ICE officers are under to make daily arrest quotas. Citing ICE officials, the paper reports agents are expected to take into custody 3,000 people nationwide each day. That daily benchmark works out to about 1 million arrests in a year. The Journal states, quote, though ICE has never come close to meeting that daily goal, officers are rewarded for making arrests, even if the immigrants they take in are later released. Additionally, the paper highlights how the Minneapolis operation feels different on the ground compared to other major cities where ICE has been deployed. That's because some 3,000 federal officers are operating in and around Minneapolis, a city of 430,000 people. Compare that with just a few hundred agents sent to Chicago last fall. That was a city with 2.7 million residents. Meantime, Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara is questioning the actions of an ICE agent who shot and killed Renee Good earlier this month. In an interview with 60 Minutes, O'Hara said the agent appeared to violate basic officer safety principles when approaching Good's SUV, repeatedly placing himself in the vehicle's path just before the shooting. O'Hara says after reviewing the video, he's left with serious concerns, including why the ICE officer placed himself in harm's way and didn't follow basic procedures. Watch.
I've seen the videos, and it's not clear to me why he appears to be in the path of the vehicle more than once. When you approach someone in a vehicle in a law enforcement encounter, there's very basic steps you take to ensure the officer's safety and to de-escalate the situation.
I want to bring in live from Minneapolis, MS Now reporter Nnamdi Egwuonwu. Nnamdi, just set us up for what we're in for this week, because over the weekend we've seen reporting around the potential for subpoenas against Governor Walz and Mayor Frey. I imagine that people are still very concerned and the mood is intense. At the same time, it's also really, really cold there, right? So what does that set up for this week?
Well, you know, it's easy to presume that because of the cold weather we've seen in recent days, it's currently about -8, that there may be a decrease in some of those protests you've been seeing. I can tell you that we've been surprised that hasn't necessarily been the case. You know, we're back at the Whipple Federal Building, which has served as both the de facto headquarters for ICE here, but also a consistent site of protests. And despite the cold weather, it has continued to be a consistent site of protest, particularly amid, reports that the Justice Department were investigating Mayor Frey and Governor Walz. And like you said, as Trump and the Army at least ready for the possibility of some sort of deployment of federal military personnel here. That, of course, fueling anger, fueling frustrations among people here that have wanted, if anything, a decrease in the amount of federal officials, federal immigration personnel that are in this city. We've continued to see a response from local police here, local sheriff deputies here, who are tasked with ensuring that tensions remain low, doing what they can to make sure the clashes we've seen at this building aren't happening as consistently as they were. I want to show you some changes that have been made to this building to make sure that happens. If you look behind me, you'll see fencing all across the sidewalk here that typically protesters are pushed back in. We've seen in recent days a larger presence of the Hennepin County Sheriff here, who have now been tasked with ensuring that protesters essentially stay on this side of the sidewalk. You've seen the viral videos of protesters in the middle of the street, even walking as close to the entrance of this facility, specifically touching on cars, interacting directly with the agents as they go in and out. The sheriffs are trying to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. They've told me as of this morning that's both to protect the safety of those protesters, some of whom quite literally are in the middle of the road sometimes, but also to limit those clashes you've been seeing from federal agents and protesters amid this threat of a potential escalation of federal resources if those clashes get too volatile. Another protest I want to highlight took place yesterday. It was actually at a church service. Protesters identified a pastor at one church in St. Paul that they believed was an immigration agent. They interrupted that church service and did a protest demonstration while there. Interestingly enough, the Justice Department responded to that hours later, saying that they intend to investigate some of the quote quote, agitators that they said interrupted that church service. So again, you're still seeing new methods of protest. Frustrations remain high, and a Justice Department that's responding by not backing down, but saying we're going to continue to investigate the protesters and fortify the building behind me to ensure that these agents can still do their job.
Yeah, double down has been the response of the administration at every turn. I do just quickly want to spotlight the conversations that you've been having with the Native American population in Minnesota, who have been among those expressing a lot of fear about what's happening. Just take us inside those conversations.
Well, you know, Ali, we've gotten to spend the last several days with members of the Native community here, and it's the last group that you think would be stressed or worried about any kind of interaction with ICE. But nonetheless, several of them told us that they're essentially concerned that the 3,000 odd agents that are here just aren't familiar with the Native population, and as such, may go to Minneapolis, see a brown face, and assume that it's someone subject to a stop. We've heard stories from members of the Native community that they have experienced stops with officers, that when showing their tribal ID, those IDs aren't always recognized by immigration agents as legitimate form of identification, and reports at least that some members of tribal communities may actually have been detained. I want to play for you some of the conversations we had with various tribal members exactly about this. Take a listen.
We're the first inhabitants of this country. This is our land. This is Native land. Right now, we're on Dakota land, right here in the Twin Cities. Some of these ICE agents who are coming into our community, they could be from Indiana, Mississippi, where they're not used to seeing Native peoples. They just see a brown person and think we're all immigrants. You know, and I'm scared for the young Indian kid walking from Little Earth down to the corner store, just trying to go get a bottle of pop or some chips, and doesn't have an ID on him, getting detained. And it's already happened.
Now, if I can outline one of the ways the community is responding, a tribal leader gave me a little history lesson. In 1968, in South Minneapolis, in response to concerns that the police were targeting the Native community, the American Indian Movement, which is based here in Minneapolis, they created patrols that would essentially safeguard the community, escort tribal members that were concerned about potential interactions with police. Well, Ali, roughly 60 years later, they've reformed those patrols, but this time in response to concerns about encounters with ICE.
Yeah, community members just trying to protect each other. MS Now reporter Nnamdi Egwuonwu, thank you for coming on with us live from Minneapolis. I want to bring in now MS Now national security reporter David Rohde. So, David, you talked to the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. That's Congressman Adam Smith of Washington. You spoke about active duty troops being told to prepare to head to Minnesota. What did he tell you, and what's informing his state of mind right now as we wait to see what ends up ultimately happening?
So Representative Smith said he had no, he's the ranking member, as you said, on the House Armed Services Committee. He'd been told nothing about this. The military doesn't have to notify Congress for this kind of step. But he said it's extraordinary and unnecessary, and he thought it would essentially be just exacerbate the tensions there. Doing this would involve invoking the Insurrection Act. The last time that was used was in 1992. It was during the L.A. riots where 63 people died and more than 2,000 were injured. The only person who has died in Minnesota is the one protester who was shot by the ICE agent. And so there's just a feeling from Democratic members of Congress that this is just overkill. And Congressman Smith, thinks this is just going to increase tensions, not decrease them.
Yeah, says it's going to be a huge mistake to send those troops to Minneapolis. So that's one piece that we're watching. But then I also wonder, I can guess what the congressional reaction is going to be to this idea that the DOJ has opened an investigation into Governor Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. But just talk a little bit about how stunning that is to hear, especially as we saw the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota just last week lose multiple prosecutors because they were concerned in part about the way that there was a lack of investigation into the ICE officer and pushing towards an investigation into Renee Good and their partner.
Yeah, so Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said over the weekend that there was not going to be an investigation of the officer. There was actually the investigations focused on Renee Good and her spouse. And it's just extraordinary to have him announcing the outcome of the investigation when it's just begun. The investigation is supposed to be based on facts. So everything seems to be going backwards. It is, you would think it's possibly a negotiation tactic. We've tried to get comment from the Pentagon. They refer us to the White House. This is all tightly controlled by the president, his inner circle, Stephen Miller. And again, the strategy seems to be to just try to intimidate and frighten people, but that tends to anger people on the ground. So it's a difficult situation. Local officials are then pressured to be seen as standing up to their community. They're facing re-election. They need to show that they're defending the people of Minneapolis and Minnesota. So it just seems to be an escalatory spiral at this point.
Yeah, certainly. But also think about even just in the last week, the headlines that we've seen. We began last week talking about how there's a potential investigation into the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. He comes out and says, this is a way to try to coerce me into the policy goals that the White House wants. You end the week then with the governor of Minnesota, who also happened to be a 2024 member of the Democratic ticket, saying this is meant to coerce us into a fearful posture to couch what the administration wants on the ground. I think there's something so fundamentally concerning when you continue to see that as the way that this administration is pushing forward. And then you take into consideration the Insurrection Act piece of it. Are there words that you're looking for from the administration, actions that they might take that will signal that this is where it's going?
The word that comes to mind for me is just, again, unprecedented. We were talking about 65 deaths the last time this was done in 1992. It was at the request of the governor of California because the rioting had gotten so out of control. So this is just completely different. It's an astounding use of federal power in a state. And again, it's a sort of a core principle of the Republican Party to respect states' rights. So that's the question. We just have to see what comes out of the White House and what comes from President Trump. But this is the approach he uses. It's very different. But Greenland, he's threatening there, escalating there, not allowing maybe even the people of Greenland basic democratic principles to decide what country they want to be part of. Instead, he's simply telling Denmark and Europe the U.S. is going to buy it. So all of this is just unprecedented, whether it's Minnesota or around the world.
Yeah, the U.S. is going to buy it by coercion methods if necessary, and we're going to dig into that coming up a little bit later in the show. For now, MS Now national security reporter David Rohde, thank you, as always, for coming on.